Hello everyone, my name is Tyler Mills. Today I want to talk a little bit about nonverbal communication. I'm going to start by going over what nonverbal communication is, why it is important that we understand it, some examples of nonverbal communication, and how it's relevant to our job or career field of EMS. Nonverbal communication is something we continuously do when we interact with others. It can often be referred to as a nonverbal behavior because it's more often than not body language that we utilize when we're speaking between one another. Nonverbal communication can be facial expressions, body movements, posture, gestures, eye contact, touch, space, and even voice. And I thought it was interesting that voice was one, but I'll explain in more detail on each of these in a little bit. Nonverbal communication can convey to others what we think of them, what they think of us when we're speaking, how much they respect you, or how much you respect them, and whether or not that they trust you or what their general opinion of you is. It is important to know that nonverbal communication can't be faked. So we can't put on a face of being positive or confident if we don't truly believe that about ourselves. We've all been taught at one point or another in our lives to sit a certain way, to place our fingers a certain way, such as locking them together, or to shake hands in such a way that we give off this idea that we're confident or we have a feeling of dominance over ourselves or someone else. If we're not feeling that way, though, those tricks don't work. We won't come across that way. It shows right through that. Nonverbal communication is greatly affected by our stress level. When we're stressed out, we can give off confusing nonverbal cues, misread other people's communication and their signals that they're putting off, and we often revert back to what's comfortable behavior for us. And if that comfortable behavior for us involves being overly emotional or that we rely on our emotions to solve things instead of using our head, then it can often make a bad situation even worse. We have to understand that with nonverbal communication, or it's important that we understand with nonverbal communication that it affects our interaction with each and everyone around us. When we're talking with someone, the way we listen, look, move, and react to what they're saying tells them if we truly care or not. If we're sending the wrong cue, whether we mean to or not, then that'll determine whether or not that person is going to be willing to open up to us, or if they may become upset with us. A lot of times we may say one thing and we feel like we mean what we said, but our nonverbal communication cues can cause it to be interpreted in a different way, and often it's not the way that we're expecting it to be interpreted in. I'm going to briefly go over now some of the different examples of nonverbal communication that we can use. So one of the big ones is facial expressions. Our faces are very expressive. They can show our emotions without saying a single word. Facial expressions are universal. This means that happiness, sadness, anger, surprise, fear, and disgust are the same across all cultures and regions when shown by a facial expression relating to them. The next one is body movement and posture. The way we sit, walk, stand, or hold our head can say a lot about what we're thinking or feeling. And I can think back on, especially in school, when we slouch in our chairs, we're giving off this idea that we don't want to be there or that we're bored. When we are feeling confident, we stand taller and we walk with our shoulders kind of outstretched in a broad fashion. The one I found interesting was gestures. There are many gestures that we use daily that we take for granted. Some of these are waving, pointing, beckoning, or when we use our hands when we're in an argument with someone or when we're speaking animatedly. It's very common in our culture that we use our hands when we speak. However, we have to be careful at times because not all gestures mean the same thing across every culture. So it's important that we're cautious when using them. Eye contact, I believe, is the most important nonverbal cue that we can use. It's very important because it's often the dominant sense for most people. The way we look at someone or hold the eye contact during a conversation can say whether we're interested in what that person has to say, whether we're feeling affectionate towards that person, are we feeling hostile towards that person, or are we attracted to that person? Eye contact is also very important for maintaining the flow in a conversation, and it helps you to gauge whether or not the other person is interested in what you have to say. And it can often be useful for you to figure out what that person's response is going to be to what you have to say, or what they believe your response is going to be to what they had to say. Touch is another big one. We say a large amount through touch, and it's one of those ones where it's easier to describe based on examples than it is to give a definition of touch for nonverbal communication. So in your head, think about some of these examples and the emotions or the thoughts and feelings that you received after receiving touch. So a warm hug, or a weak versus a strong handshake, patting someone on the back, a controlling grip on someone's arm, maybe a condescending pat on the head. All of these are different examples of touch that all give off different cues as to what someone is feeling or thinking. Space is another one. And this relates to everyone having a personal bubble. We all have a different personal bubble, and it's very much dependent on how comfortable we are with those around us. No one likes having their personal space invaded, and the level of space is dependent both on the culture as well as the person. Physical space can communicate signals of intimacy and affection, but it could also signal aggression or dominance. So it's important that when we deal with our patients in the field that we don't want to violate that personal space without being invited into it. Voice is the next one. Voice is considered a form of nonverbal communication, which may seem odd because you would think it has to do with talking, which would be a verbal form of communication. However, talking is not only, or what we say is not only important, it's how we say it. If we don't watch our pace, our timing, our loudness, the tone we use, how we put inflection on our words, and the sounds that come out of our mouth when we're speaking, we can send the wrong message when talking with people. People will listen to what we say and how we say it. Our voice can show whether we are happy, sad, excited, angry, sarcastic, confident, or even unsure, to name a few. For example, if I were to end a sentence with an inflection on the end that made it sound like I was questioning something, someone may come across and hear that and feel that I'm unsure or that I don't have 100% knowledge on what I'm talking about. Often we can get ourselves into trouble by saying one thing, but the tone or inflection we use can give off a different emotion and can cause people to become upset with us by it. When it comes to nonverbal communication in the field of EMS, it is very important that we have a proper understanding of it. Communication in general is crucial to our field of work. We require in all aspects of what we do, and we need it in order to properly treat our patients. We utilize it to understand the problem or complaint the patient has, to try to obtain a history from them, as well as develop a working relationship with the patient. Our understanding of nonverbal communication can either make or break the relationship we have with our patients. For instance, if we come into a patient's home, greet them with a smile, shake their hand, and we try to get to know who they are and what the issue is, more than likely they're going to be honest with us, and we're going to be able to help determine what's wrong and what level of treatment we need to provide to them. Eye contact with our patients, I feel, is one of the most important things we can do. Often I find myself on calls, I get so distracted or enveloped in getting the tools I need or taking the patient's vitals that even when I know I'm listening to what the patient has to say to me, I'm not providing the proper level of eye contact to them. So they may not necessarily feel like I'm caring. So that's one of the important things, is eye contact can help us to help us build that level of trust with our patients, and it allows them to see that we truly do care, or it gives them that feeling that we truly do care. Because that's our ultimate goal, is we're there to provide the highest level of care possible to the patient and make them feel like we're truly caring. However, if we're not careful, we can easily break the trust with each and every one of our patients that we build. If we talk to them with a condescending tone, or we give off the feeling that the position they're in or what's wrong with them is their fault, then we can easily lose that level of trust, and they could become upset with us very quickly. We never want to blame the patient for anything that's going on. Walking into a scene with a look of shock on our face can scare a patient or cause them to panic, which that could possibly cause them to become further harmed, and we don't want to do that. Our nonverbal cues can be downright dangerous at points too. If we're not careful with the cues we give off, it can lead us into situations where we may end up being harmed because of something that our face said, or the tone in our voice inflected a feeling upon the patient or a bystander around them, and they didn't like it. For instance, maybe our patient is intoxicated, or they're under the influence of drugs, or they're just agitated and angry. We have to be careful with what tone we give off, what posture we're using in our body language, any facial expressions we use. If we give off this impression that we are, if we give off this impression that we're angry or upset, or we appear aggressive, these cues could send the wrong message to those around us or the patient, and that patient or that bystander may become hostile and violent with us. And the last thing we want to do is put ourselves in a situation or at risk for more harm than we need to be in. It is key that we recognize that our nonverbal cues can and will play a role in how our patients act toward us, as well as determine what information that they're going to be willing to provide us. It's important that we have knowledge of the different cues when we are interacting with each and every one of our patients and those around us. It's useful to us when communicating with our patients because we can recognize some of those cues, and it'll give us an idea of whether or not they're being honest or what they're truly feeling versus what they're saying. We can read the cues that they're giving us to help determine whether or not the patient is agreeing with what we believe the treatment should be, or whether the patient is becoming upset, or are they becoming hostile, or is what we're doing helping to calm the patient. It can often be difficult because we don't always pay attention to the cues that we're being given, or the cues we're giving off as well. There are many different scenarios that we could walk through and discuss based on different nonverbal cues. However, the important takeaway I want everyone to remember is that we're always using nonverbal communication. We don't always think about it and we don't always recognize it. But if we don't properly understand it, then we are likely to get ourselves into trouble by using it incorrectly. I believe it is wise of us as emergency care providers to take a look at how we act, both through our words and through our actions as well. It can be difficult to view our actions or our nonverbal cues. This may seem odd, but one way to study our own nonverbal cues is to record yourself giving a speech or interacting with others, and then view the video yourself, and you can see some of the cues that you give off. This can be important for us to help us learn what some of our cues are so we can better control them when we go in and deal with the patient. So, like I said, I want everyone to remember it's important that we learn what nonverbal cues are, and that we make sure that when we're interacting with our patients and those around us, that we're not giving off the wrong impression and doing further harm, even when we don't mean to be. Thank you for watching.